Cynthia. Now, the second panel will cover the practical implementation of the award in legal, technological, and collaborative domains. It will also examine how the award's legal victory is being upheld through legal and policy strategies, technology-enabled monitoring and enforcement, and regional initiatives that strengthen compliance and reduce conflict. We asked the questions such as what roles can unilateral groupings like the Quad play in supporting the enforcement of the award without further escalating regional tensions. We also asked that in the light of ongoing gray-zone warfare and the use of water cannons, what specific shared technology-driven monitoring system should ASEAN claimant states co-invest in to provide indisputable real-time evidence of law of the sea violations? What legal, operational, and diplomatic measures can be utilized to ensure effective compliance with the award and preserve peace and stability in the South China Sea? As the region aims to conclude a code of conduct, what specific legal mechanisms can ASEAN member states use to ensure that the final agreement is not only substantive but explicitly grounded in the 1982 UN Convention of the Law of the Sea and the award's legal clarifications? So we have three panels. We have one panel of experts, and I'll be inviting them each individually because they will have presentations, and then I will invite them as a group for the panel discussion. So without further ado, my partner in crime here in Jakarta will go ahead. Professor Arie, please, the floor is yours.
Take a look at my notes so I don't have to speak out of tangent. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and pleasure to speak on my topic here, talking about something that we always dream about: peaceful cooperation. But the peaceful cooperation here, based on what we have shared maritime space that will support navigation, the trade, fisheries, energy security, marine diversity, and coastal livelihoods. The region, therefore, cannot wait for, of course, every sovereignty and maritime boundary questions to be resolved before the cooperation begins. And in this presentation, I would like to propose that maybe Indonesia can help to build practical arrangements that can reduce tension, improve communication, and strengthen confidence, where ASEAN can also provide the institutional framework to ensure that this initiative remains inclusive and regionally owned. Next, please. The starting point should be cooperation without prejudice. Participation is a cooperation activity that should not be interpreted as recognizing, rejecting, strengthening, or weakening any sovereignty claims or maritime entitlement. This approach is familiar in international maritime practice. States can cooperate on practical matters while expressly preserving their legal positions. This is particularly familiar in international maritime practice. This is particularly important in South China Sea, where legal, historical, political, and strategic consideration are closely connected. Cooperation should therefore focus on shared interests, including maritime safety, environmental protection, sustainable fisheries, search and rescue, scientific research, and incident prevention. UNCLOS can provide common legal foundation. However, it should be used as a basis for responsible conduct and dialogue, rather than as an instrument for public confrontation. Next, please. Indonesia is well placed to make a constructive contribution. As a world's largest archipelagic state, Indonesia has extensive experience, so I claim, in maritime governance, navigation, fisheries management, maritime security, and marine environmental protection. Again, Indonesia is not a claimant to the dispute of South China Sea, but at the same time, Indonesia has interests in a wider region and consistently support UNCLOS, peaceful dispute settlement, and regional stability. This gives Indonesia space to understand both the legal importance of maritime rights and the political sensitivity surrounding the disputes. Indonesia has a long tradition of facilitating dialogue that we can remember back in 1995, where the late Professor Hasim Jalal is starting to make the workshop on managing the dispute on the South China Sea. And Indonesia, up until now, should not seek to arbitrate between claimants or impose a settlement. Maybe Indonesia should become an honest facilitator that is creating space for dialogue and helping translate general commitments into practical initiatives, like the one that we are doing right now. Next, please. So in my view, enforcement should not be understood only in the terms of sanctions, pressure, or confrontation. A more sustainable approach is embedded in compliance. This means placing responsible behavior in everyday maritime practice through procedures, communication channels, shared expectation, and repeated cooperations. This means placing responsible behavior into everyday maritime practice, and states could develop common procedures, even for unplanned encounters between Coast Guard's vessels, establish direct communication channels, and agree on protocols for search and rescue. These measures may appear technical, but they are strategically important, in my view. Many maritime incidents begin not with a deliberate decision to create a crisis, but miscommunication, uncertainty, or the absence of clear procedures. Over the time, this habit can create stronger expectation of restraint and support more regional arrangements. Next, please. Technology also has an important role, particularly in maritime domain awareness. Satellite imagery, vessel tracking system, radar networks, and information sharing platforms can help states understand what is happening at sea. A shared monitoring system should not primarily become a platform for accusation or public shaming. Its main purpose should be improve safety, verify incidents, support communication, and prevent misunderstanding. Claimant states could begin with limited cooperation on non-controversial matters such as severe weather, vessels in distress, oil spills, navigational hazards, or illegal fishing patterns. Indonesia could support technical training, common data standards, or an ASEAN pilot project. Sensitive information could remain protected, while operational information needed for safety could be exchanged. Technology should support trust and accountability, not become another arena of rivalry. Next, please. ASEAN is sometimes criticized for not producing rapid or legally binding outcomes. However, ASEAN's contribution should not be measured only by whether it resolves sovereignty disputes. ASEAN can connect different areas of cooperation, including maritime safety, fisheries, and civil maritime law enforcement. The challenge is that these initiatives are often fragmented. Indonesia, again, can encourage ASEAN to bring together under a more coherent maritime cooperation framework. ASEAN could support a regional maritime risk assessment, a network of Coast Guard contact points, and regular exercise on search and rescue or pollution response. Therefore, ASEAN centrality could therefore mean keeping regional cooperation inclusive, balanced, and well-connected. Next, please. In this case, I would like to see a more practical roles for Indonesia. First, as a convener, it can bring together officials, maritime agencies, legal experts, scientists, and technical specialists. As a translator, it can turn broad diplomatic principles such as restraint and cooperation into operational procedures, in which probably nowadays is being negotiated under the negotiation of the COC. Third, as a platform builder, it can support information sharing, trainings, workshops, and pilot projects under ASEAN. Fourth, as a bridge, it can connect claimant and non-claimant ASEAN members and link legal discussion with practical maritime cooperations. And as a confidence builder, Indonesia can propose initiatives that are limited, transparent, reversible, and without prejudice to legal positions. So the key is to begin manageable projects. Broad regional agreement may be difficult, but smaller arrangement on emergency communication, scientific research, and other non-sensitive projects may be achievable. Indonesia's most effective approach may be for a quiet practicality, respecting all parties and concentrating on initiatives that produce visible benefits. Next, please. The Code of Conducts. There is still reason to maintain hope in the Code of Conduct negotiation, despite some frustration that I've heard from some of colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The process has taken a long time. The issues remain complex, but continued negotiation keeps all the parties engaged within the regional diplomatic framework. It should be consistent with international law, particularly UNCLOS. It should confirm that participation does not prejudice to legal position of any party. It should include practical rules on incident prevention, communication, restraint, and crisis management. And of course, we should remain realistic. The code may not resolve sovereignty dispute or delimit maritime boundaries, but it can still make behavior more predictable, reduce escalation risks, and strengthen consultation. That would already represent a meaningful contribution to a regional peace. Last slide. Let me conclude with one proposition that a cooperative South China Sea is not a concession by any claim, but it is a discipline exercised by all parties. Indonesia and ASEAN cannot resolve every legal or political disagreement, but they can help to ensure that this agreement does not automatically become confrontation. Yeah. Indonesia should continue to act as a facilitator, platform builder, and a bridge. ASEAN can continue to provide an inclusive institutional home for the process. The Code of Conduct remains difficult, but remains possible. A practical and UNCLOS consistent code would be an important step towards a more stable maritime order. The South China Sea should therefore viewed not only as a space of consultation, but also a shared sea where cooperation is necessary. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning, everyone. Before I begin, allow me to extend my gratitude to FACS Asia, the Foundation for the National Interests, and the UI Center for Sustainable Ocean Policy for having me. In my role as an Associate Program Officer for the Global Maritime Crime Program, I would need to begin with a customary but very important caveat that the views I express today are entirely my own, yet they're not necessarily reflective of the positions of the United Nations or the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, where I currently serve. Okay, so I had arrived in Jakarta from Timor-Leste last weekend. And Timor-Leste is a country that's so young in inception, but yet so willing and eager to learn the instruments that it needs to enforce international law within its own maritime jurisdiction. And so, standing here today, I am freshly reminded that we are all along the same spectrum of learning to enforce a maritime order rooted in international law, and that the key in doing so is in doing it together. This panel revolves around exploring how the Arbitral Award can be given effect through law, technology, and cooperation. And from my vantage point here at the United Nations, working closely every day with maritime law enforcement agencies across the region, I've learned that 10 years on from the release of the award has managed to elicit particular value in being able to command increased deference across the region. towards the obligations stated under UNCLOS. The award was successful in clarifying how the UNCLOS framework is applicable in our maritime space, and it did set significant precedents in developing this same consciousness amongst agencies to accurately interpret and implement those obligations. And I do see this appetite for clarity for international law resonate within my own engagements with agencies here. Many of the MLE officers that I meet are always calling for having this common interpretation of UNCLOS. And so a lot of our work and discussion revolves around wanting to understand what an accepted operationalization of UNCLOS obligations would look like. And this is the juncture at which our program sits, because at the very end of the day, the role of maritime law enforcement is to de-escalate incidents at sea. And if agencies cannot see and cannot implement international law in the same way with the same tools, then there is no number of agreements or declarations that would suffice in maintaining a sustainable legal maritime order. Next slide, please. Oh, that's huge. All right, and so for today, I'd like to offer a vision of what is needed for a maritime order that enforces international law. And the maritime order of the coming decade will need to be technology-driven. In our discussions with officers, they're constantly recounting their experiences of needing to make these split-second decisions when faced with an escalating incident at sea. And it is at this very point on the vessel faced with all friction at sea that the strength of international law is most tested. And it is at this very moment that technology becomes the enabler. For this is where technology intersects with law and where it adds real value. Next slide, please. Okay, great. I wanted to show this to you because when we think about technology, we often just think about maritime domain awareness. But really, technology transcends throughout the entire maritime law enforcement cycle, accompanying us from the very point of surveillance right down to interdiction, the chain of custody, and eventually in collecting that significant evidence we need to prosecute and attain a successful legal finish. If you can go back to the previous slide. And so by incorporating technology in the work that we do, this calls for a shift in how we think about technology, how we master technology, and how we complement technology. Thank you. So in thinking about technology, we can go down to the next two slides, please. Yeah, after this. Next slide. Thank you. So in thinking about technology, most of our concerns lie around the lawfulness of actions at sea and activities in contested areas. And so when we do see a potential incident at sea, our natural instinct is to want to monitor and keep a record of this. But by treating technology as a mere monitoring and evidence collection tool really undermines its real purpose. Because findings that are acquired through a single vessel tracking software can easily be refuted by findings from other sources, found in human intelligence, found in international agreements or satellite data. And so what this has done is that it would fan the flames of the dispute rather than resolving it. And this is what happens when we adopt maritime domain awareness as a rudimentary monitoring tool. It transforms MDA into an evidence collection mechanism rather than as a public good. And here at GMCP, our priority is equal access to maritime domain awareness tools across the region. We are looking to eliminate the exclusivity that surround vessel tracking software, satellite data, and ownership databases. So MDA can become transparent, inclusive, and usable only in good faith. And this would also lend MDA the credibility it needs, right? Especially as we look to resolve threats around the region collectively. We're looking into working together on search and rescue, protecting our marine protected areas, countering smuggling, and even preventing damage to critical undersea infrastructure. Ultimately, our vision around thinking about MDA is in building a regional capability that's akin to a trusted CCTV network, where any incident witnessed by the watch floors of every maritime operations center in the region will be recorded. This will also instill a shared obligation across regional agencies to want to respond proactively to an incident that they see, especially if it's an escalating crisis. And so having this collective mindset around MDA builds the trust, and it also raises the region's collective capability. This is connected very closely to my second point, which is the need to set standards for mastering technology. MDA has evolved significantly in the past 10 years since the release of the award, from national vessel monitoring systems to satellite AIS, radio frequency detection, and if they do switch off their AIS, you have synthetic aperture radars. But access does not just mean mastering technology. And so I would encourage the region that if it were to invest in anything strategically, it would not be in the expensive one-off satellite imageries or the shiny MDA equipment. It would be in investing in the trained analysts. And it is this analyst who would be able to take data and compare it across different terrestrial, space-based data and aerial data, and be able to distinguish a spoofing activity from a stationary vessel that happens to be in distress. These trained analysts are a cost-efficient solution that would be able to replace the expenses that you'd have otherwise invested in time and fuel to deploy assets out to sea. GMCP delivers a 3-tiered analytical MDA course and trains officers on MDA, bringing them through basic, intermediate, and advanced courses. We also work alongside the Japan Coast Guard and Japan Space Agency on aerial surveillance, and we work not just with Coast Guards, but also invite fisheries enforcement agencies to gain the expertise and access to MDA tools. They are attending a workshop in September, specifically for fisheries enforcement. But mastery isn't just on MDA, it's also in being able to bridge the multiple languages that we speak across the South China Sea. And so we are offering a standardized multilingual modality that will be able to set regional standards through commonly agreed phases. And I think this was mentioned earlier by Arie, in creating a neutral operating language that will be broadcasted out to sea. These modalities will also be accompanied with de-escalation playbooks that set procedures on how to respond to potential escalation. Mastery also means operational skill sets. And so we at the program are delivering visit board search and seizure in Batam, which has very kindly been hosted by Bakamla. We provide training on digital evidence extraction and even predictive analysis on our MDA data. This lets us attain the legal finish and lets us learn how to use technology to collect that evidence that we need to eventually bring this to court. But all of this does not matter if technology isn't complemented. And this is where we need to fuse not just data, capabilities, but also skill sets. Having a single irregular dot in our MDA software means that we need to be able to correlate this point with other evidence or information that we're receiving through coastal radars, satellite feeds, patrol aircraft, all flowing through maritime operations centers across the region almost instantaneously. And this mindset will be able to help us build a regional picture of a pattern of life, not merely the operation of a single vessel. We are looking to build an advanced programming interface hub, also known as an API hub, in some countries, and this will be able to help provide that common operating picture that we need. Having a common operational picture isn't just surveillance, it also sets the foundation of trust for us to rely on our neighbors for an operational response. In addition to also building a operational picture, we're also looking to fuse skill sets by inviting various regional maritime law enforcement agencies, women in particular, to a VBSS training in Batam. And this helps them learn from their different counterparts on how they do execute different procedures on evidence collection and building that case package. Ultimately, technology is also being brought into our regional level discussions, such as the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, which was recently concluded this year, and also the Maritime Law Enforcement Dialogue that was held in Manado. And these are two regional events that UNODC GMCP supports, especially on the conversation of information sharing. And so if we were to return to the question of how to enforce the Arbitral Award, I would say in a nutshell, next slide please, to really think about the work that we do in these terms. Technology should be seen as the scaffolding through which we are building the continuous professionalization of our maritime law enforcement agencies. You then have the building blocks. These would be advancing standards, building trust and supplementing information, and adhering to common playbooks and procedures. Because in the end, it is not the law or technology that determines whether the award holds. It is the relationship between maritime law enforcement agencies themselves. And so that is exactly where the solution lies within our maritime law enforcement forces, not around the friction, but by working through it professionally together. Thank you very much, Julio. Back to you.
I'll invite Prof. Arie to also take your seat, and also our panelist, panel discussant, Mr. Thenesh Anbalagan, who I will invite to deliver his comments from the stage. So, Thenesh, if you can deliver your discussion from there, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thenesh, and I'm here to not only discuss but also to share some thoughts on the entire topic on enforcing the Arbitral Award. Although I'm discussing as well, I also have to speak, and when I speak, I have to make some clarification that my views do not represent the views of the government of Malaysia, but these are my views. It's a sensitive topic, we all know that. So, but we will have a fruitful discussion on this. So, based on what Prof. Arie shared and what Dr. has shared as well, I think we can come to an understanding that two things. In order to move forward with the situation in the South China Sea, there are two things that we need. One is practicality, the other is technology. The reason being is because I don't think the Philippines and also China can come to a common ground as to how to deal with the award. So what ASEAN can do as a whole is to find practical measures, which requires a lot of communication, a lot of risk awareness, and also some technology building in terms of building capacity over the South China Sea. That I think will help in a lot of ways. Now, two things that I want to share is there's two truth in this. Number one, the award is binding insofar as the parties of the disputes are concerned. Of course, China have their views. Article 296 of the UNCLOS says that it does not bind other parties who are not part of the dispute. So there cannot be any call for or compulsion for other ASEAN states or any other states to come and say, no, we have to recognize the award. And that is also the reason why Malaysia takes the position that it takes notes of it, but at the same time, it still opposes the 9-9, right, in that sense. So, because of Article 296, every other states in the world or every other member states of the UNCLOS can come up with their own position as to what extent they're going to recognize it or not recognize it, or to remain neutral, or to take a different approach in how they want to deal with the situation. And that has something that I think when it comes to ASEAN, if there is some form of cooperation when it comes to the South China Sea circumstances, then the cooperation should be how do we deal with the whole idea of the 9-9, rather than how do we deal with enforcing the Arbitral Award, recognizing the Arbitral Award, or supporting the Arbitral Award, or rejecting it. So the focus should be more as to, as our rights within that region, to what extent are we going to deal with it. And of course, the fundamental or the basic position has always been recognition based on what the UNCLOS has provided in its provisions. The second thing is, if there's something that we have to learn from the 10 years of the award, is that from a practical standpoint, it's not enforceable. You've heard our colleague from our friend from China has spoken. You have heard our friends from Philippines has spoken. There's no middle ground between the two of them when it comes to that award. So in a practical and a stricter sense, or a security sense, it's impossible to enforce the award. So there must be some other solution, or there's some other thinking that we have to go through with it. Okay? And because it's not enforceable, so we have to think of something else. And of course, another thing that we have to recognize as well is that ASEAN has to come together and work together in a sense that we have to build some form of regional cooperation insofar as the region or the sea is concerned. And that requires a lot of investment in technology, a lot of communication, a lot of discussion as to how we want to deal with the risks of any potential disputes or confrontation in the South China Sea. And I think this brings me to another 2 points, which is number one, I think when we deal with the question of the South China Sea, the first thing is we have to understand that there might be a misunderstanding or there might be a different thinking as to of ASEAN neutrality. I think as ASEAN nation, we have to make very clear that ASEAN neutrality, the purpose of it is to ensure that we do not take a position. But why that ASEAN neutrality principle came about is because as developing nations, as nation developing at that point of time, what is most important for all of us is stability. Without stability, there's no prosperity. Without stability, there's no security. So that's the reason for why that ASEAN neutrality principle came about. So when we talk about ASEAN neutrality, it shouldn't be abused in the sense or misunderstood in the sense that we agree or we allow any kind of circumstances to happen within our territorial rights or within our sovereign rights. So that should be the fundamental position when it comes to how ASEAN is going to work together in terms of dealing with situation in the South China Sea. Now, the other thing that I want to put out here is that I note Judge Caprio have mentioned about a call for a need to notice the principles of international, in particular the principle of acquiescence. We have to do something about it, we have to say something about it, and in his own words he said there must be some form of protest. Whether our protest is in the form of calling for a support or recognition or enforcement of arbitral award is separate. Every other countries have their own ways of protecting its rights. But there is one thing that we have to be worried about, I think for all ASEAN nations, is the coming of Generation Z. Okay? Now, if you look very closely in all countries, Generation Z is a generation where they are either politically aware of circumstances or they are not aware at all. And whether they are aware or not aware or politically engaged or not, they do not necessarily or do not naturally engage in this kind of discussion or thinking. So, Judge Carpio I don't want to call you old, but you come from the golden generation where you guys are the one who build the nation. Now Generation Z is the one that comes in to inherit a nation. But if they are not politically aware, if they are not engaged in this discussion on the South China Sea, you might have circumstances where the approach in terms of dealing with it would be different. Whether it's Philippines, whether it's Malaysia, whether it's Thailand, whether it's China, whoever, the approach dealing with it might be different. So there must also be some form of communication, not within this room, but also with the Gen Zs, to speak to them of this policy, to speak to them of this issue, and to speak to them of this discussion, to get them to engage with it. Otherwise, you have a bunch of generation who will inherit a nation without having or might not have the same approach that you might think of. Of course, Generation Z across the board are more, I would say, inclined to cooperation in a lot of sense. So, based on our study. But we cannot not engage them when it comes to discussing this. Yes, we can engage the US, we can engage China, but internally we have to engage our own people as well to look at this from a more important angle, a more critical angle, because they would inherit the nation. So that is something that I would like the audience here to think about. Two things on ASEAN neutrality and also Generation Z. How do we engage them in terms of this discussion? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thenesh. Now, I normally would like to abuse the moderator's privilege, but I know that there were a lot of questions or hands raised earlier and we were not able to take them. So if you have questions for this panel, I'd like to open the floor immediately for a discussion. Yes, sir, you're first, second, and then we have the third gentleman here. So we can we have the gentleman in the middle, please?
Thank you. I'm from UI Universitas Indonesia. I want to ask to Prof. Arie. Prof. Arie, you earlier said about how Indonesia, what role Indonesia could do for this issue, but I want to ask, like, under the current administration, do you think it is okay to realistically expect that Indonesia will do anything on the South China Sea issue? Thank you.
Over there.
Thank you for your chance. My name is Arie Seno. I am from Indonesia Maritime Security Agency, or Indonesia is Badan Keamanan Laut Republik Indonesia, or Bakamla. I will deliver my question to one of my greatest lecturer, Prof. Afriansyah. You just mentioned about UNCLOS as common language. So, do you have any ideas on how about the other countries that haven't ratified the UNCLOS? So would we use same language to them, or maybe we should enforce them to, at the end, ratify the UNCLOS too? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a third one here, the gentleman over here, please.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting panel. Nguyen Liu from Singapore Management University. So I have one question for Dr. Salleh and one for my friend Arie. Both are very short. So for Dr. Salleh, my question is, where do those technology in the maritime enforcement come from? So that's my question to you. And to Prof. Arie, I have just heard from our Malaysian friends that Malaysia's position on the South China Sea Arbitral Award is they take note of it. What is Indonesian government's position on the South China Sea Arbitral Award? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Prof. Arie, you're the most wanted here. Asyura, but Thenesh, feel free to weigh in also, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Mas from UI, thank you for the question. As I said in my opening remarks, which is like a hard, how to say, curhat in bahasa Indonesia, saying that in my deep heart saying for my opening remarks, of course, I have disappointment for the administration for this event. Yeah. But I don't think that would give me what do you call it, a pessimism behavior, yeah, towards the administration, because I believe there are so many open-minded officers, like-minded colleagues that is still care about building up the peace in the region. And there's nothing to do with the so-called temporary administration that can be changed within 5 years. So I guess, like I proposed in my PowerPoint, Indonesia still and may become the honest facilitator, not only because our proximity towards the Secretariat, but again, I think Indonesia's people, with our friendship with everyone, we can do much about building up this cooperation of all parties that is involved in this issue. As for Mas Aryo, why don't you say you're coming from Indonesian Coast Guard? Okay, so Indonesia have the Coast Guard. That Coast Guard itself have an important role in speaking up the language, yeah, UNCLOS and how they deal on the operational basis. I think for those states that are not ratify UNCLOS, which I believe now is only less than 30, and also by means of state practices and all of the non-objection to the UNCLOS, I can say safely that most of the written rules in UNCLOS can be argued as a customary international law, despite that we know of course, there are some challenges towards it. But I guess UNCLOS, if we can be objectively read the UNCLOS, I don't think that any state would heavily object. Even though there's an objection in the first place, there were some adjustment towards the UNCLOS itself. But up until now, I guess UNCLOS still can serve as a common language, even for those who are not ratifying. Lastly, my good friends, Indonesia's position, if you say now, now I think compared to in the last 10 years, Indonesia has been consistent to support UNCLOS, of course, and the Arbitral Award. But I guess because there are some dynamics, if I say, maybe we have to reconfirm again. Because I'm not part of the government, but I guess we have to see our commitment. That it has been a long-standing, and every country has taken notes of Indonesia's note verbal, Indonesia's statement in a number of forums, and also it has been practiced consistently, and even the academic literatures have consistently about the way that I have mentioned before. So I guess there is no doubt that Indonesia still care and support UNCLOS and the award. Thank you.
Thank you. And Asyura, please. You have your own microphone, Asyura.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the questions. I thought I'd maybe address two and lend a bit more insight on the common language angle as well. But in terms of the first question that was directed on where does the technology come from, and I think UNODC is well positioned in a sense where we're able to bring in experiences and successful case studies from other regions into Southeast Asia. And so there is technology such as Skylight, which is often used across other parts of the globe as well. Although I would say that Southeast Asia is one of the more technology-dominant regions that we are working with. And so we would look to commercial vendors for their MDA vessel tracking software, and we would also lean on expertise within the region, especially if we're looking to build a new idea, such as the API hub, which I mentioned is this overarching MDA network in sharing information. On language, I thought that maybe I could learn a bit more on what we're doing there, where I think, as was mentioned by Professor Arie, that a lot of our interactions at sea may be driven by customary international law. And so there is also the risk of running different interpretations of UNCLOS. And this is a priority, right, in trying to regulate an accepted code of behavior, so to say, at sea. And what we have done under MLED, the Maritime Law Enforcement Dialogue, is to really build this modality and have that be accompanied with standard marine communication phrases, also known as SMCP. And these are standardized phrases that have been agreed by all regional maritime law enforcement agencies, and they've also been legally advised. So I've sat in the room with these agencies, really looking and thinking about how we can incorporate obligations under UNCLOS into these phrases. And so there is this consistent level of messaging that is being broadcasted out at sea. And this really lends towards achieving that common language of UNCLOS, especially in the operationalized sphere.
Thank you. And Thenesh, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, so perhaps I will explain why Malaysia's position is what it is. From a cultural sense, Malaysia is a multiracial country. Okay, we have the Malays, we have the Chinese, the Indians. So the Malays are non-confrontational. The Chinese loves money and trade, and the Indians are a bit expressive. So when you have different dynamics and different cultural thinking, the easiest answers to how we project ourselves on the diplomatic front to be not to say anything at all. Yeah. so just to explain lightly why in that sense. But of course, Malaysia has a unique position with China. And it also has a very unique position, whether with Singapore or Philippines or Thailand and etc. So how we approach the situation would be much more different than every other states. And that is the reason why I think rather than enforcing the arbitral award, which I'm not denying Philippines' rights to do that, I'm not denying Philippines' legitimacy to do that, but what I'm saying is that we should find some common ground where we can come to a joint understanding as to how do we deal with the South China Sea. Malaysia has its position, Singapore has taken a position, Vietnam as well, and the Philippines as well. Even Hollywood has taken a position, you know, through their depiction in Barbie and all. Yeah, which is very unnecessary. So I think the starting point is to come to that understanding first. Then the second one is to build some capacity on the sea, which is why those discussion on technology is very important. I mean, just to give you an example, we have a problem in ASEAN where we don't really cooperate or work together in a lot of fronts. And the fact that now we have the coming of the DEFA, we now have the coming of the ASEAN Power Grid, a lot of these very good collaboration that is coming forward. I think it's about time there is some more concrete collaboration in the sea itself. And technology is where it's supposed to start. Malaysia has Asia, Singapore has Grab, Philippines and Thailand, all of them have their own technology capacity. So, and we are all, to some extent, semiconductors involvement. We are involved in semiconductors. So there should be some form of G2G collaboration in that sense to build some form of capacity and technology which we can then utilize and put in on the sea. So the question is not so much of how are we going to enforce the award, but maybe to think about how do we operationalize the award in the sense of technology, in the sense of communication, and many other fronts. Whether it's in the military manual, whether it's on food security, whether it's on fisheries, the award and the understanding of the award should be operationalized in that sense. I think that's where we can come to a common ground. And of course, if ASEAN is coming together in taking this approach, it benefits all of us in that sense. And I think that should be the approach or how we look at this whole question of enforcement, in my humble opinion.
Thank you. Now we'll go to our second round of questions. If you can raise your hand so that I can see you. Yes, ma'am. First here, and then second here, and then third would be Das. Okay? And then I'll just take a fourth one in the back also. So, sir, ma'am, please, can we have the microphone over here?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sue from Center for International Law, NUS. Thank you very much for the insightful discussions. And my question will be to Asyura, talking about using technology for maritime law enforcement. I think it's really increasingly important to use modern technologies like artificial intelligence, for example, to really, aware of what's going on in our maritime zones, and particularly with the recent incidents on damage of undersea critical undersea infrastructures. So my question is that when you because you engage a lot with the law enforcement agencies in the region, so how do you assess their capabilities moving forward to strengthen their capabilities for monitoring and surveillance? Because it's very important to be aware in a timely manner that when the damage happens at sea, that the authorities are alerted so that law enforcement actions can be done. That is my question. And also talking about the common language and understandings for the law enforcement in the region. I understand that we have this ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, and which is now in the progress of formalizing it. So do you have you ever engaged as UNODC with ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, or do you have any plan? And also my very last questions would be the also emerging cybersecurity threats, which is increasingly very important as well. So is UNODC looking at this particular issue as well? And how do we upskill and inform the law enforcement authorities of these emerging security threats as well? Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman over here, I think, was raising his hand. I think that was you. Yeah.
Thank you, the panelists, for a very interesting presentation. I have a question for my friends, Arie. Number one is, in your presentation, you said that Indonesia is a claimant for any dispute with the South China Sea, right? So the question is, now China said that China have overlapping issues with Indonesia in the North Natuna water. So do you think that in legal wars, or legally speaking, do you think that we have a dispute about the dispute, whether or not we have a dispute between China and Indonesia regarding the area of North Natuna? The second question is about the Malaysian colleague here. As you said that we should focus mainly on the operation of the arbitral awards, meaning that we should operate how we apply UNCLOS in terms of fishery, in terms of energy, food security, etc. The question is, in reality, do you think that is really operate? Because, for example, if the China government say, we have NIDA slide here, and if you want to work with me, you have to recognize that we have overflowing water, we should have create a mechanism regarding that. Do you think that we still have a chance to operate the UNCLOS without the tool now as a award? Because in my mind, I think that the awards operate as a very important or landmark tools to interpret and clarify one of the main conventional issues or complex issues regarding the issue in the South China Sea. The question is, do you think really that we can do that without the ruling? Because in terms of clarifying.
I guess the question was asked, so
Yes,
if we can
yes.
stop
Thank
there.
you.
And ask, please.
Thank you. Also, a question addressed to Dr. Salleh. We appreciate the prospect of having to use technology to increase maritime domain awareness and having a common operational picture in our maritime domain. But similar to other questions before me, how do you see the efficacy of using this technology as tools for gathering evidence, for example, in violations of marine environmental protection, fisheries law, and to what extent can maritime law enforcement agencies use this as basis for enforcing, and which laws would they apply? Okay. For the second question, if I may be allowed to address to Arie, Professor Arie, I note that Indonesia is very sensitive as far as its fisheries rights and laws are concerned. So, moving forward in implementing the award, how would you see, how do you suggest ways to implement the ruling of the arbitral award as far as traditional fishing rights are concerned? Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take a fourth one in the back.
Good morning still. I'm Muhammad from World Order Lab, a youth-led think tank based in Indonesia and Malaysia. So 2 questions here for Dr. Asyura. Mentioning a couple of times about the building trust on Southeast Asia, trusting each other, or is there something that needs to be spoken on the table? Are we not trusting each other? What can be done about it? And the second one, Gen Z here, probably to Thenesh. So what is the best approach for you, the most tangible approach to explain what is happening in the Southeast Asia at the moment to someone who doesn't really understand what is happening? So we learn about Southeast China Sea in campus, in classes, because we learn in IR. So how would you explain to someone who don't really have any thoughts about this one? Thank you.
Thank you. I've observed that many of you are cheating, no? You're asking 2 or 3 questions all at once. And Arie has been getting a hard set of questions. So I asked Thenesh to weigh in first, followed by Asyura, and then Arie, just to give him some time to prepare. Thenesh, please.
Okay, so from the discussion that we had earlier, and many of the speakers, including the keynote speakers, I think I want to answer the question first. There's a lot of terms that have been used to describe the arbitral award. Some may say it as an answer, some may say it as a reason, some may say it as a basis or legitimacy to be used by ASEAN states in regards to how to approach the situation in the South China Sea. So when I say operationalize, I do not mean as to compel an enforcement on both sides, but rather how do we use the ideas generated within to form a cooperation between ASEAN states as to how do we move forward in the many directions that we can. So to answer that, I think it's a basis or a starting point to move forward in that sense. Now, to answer the Gen Z question, the interesting thing about Gen Z is this. They are a generation that completely grew up in an internet environment. When you have that, it means Gen Z has two worlds. The current physical reality and also the online virtual reality that they have, whether it's through their smartphones, through their social media, and etc. So a lot of the Gen Zs are engaged in the second world that they have built across the time that they have lived. So how do we get them to come out of that world, or not abandon that world in that sense, but how do we get them to lift their heads away from their smartphone to either communicate, think, and also engage on this problem? It requires a lot of effort from the government's end or even stakeholders' end to come and communicate with them in the sense of telling them that, look, whatever it is, this problem affects you in a lot of ways. We talk about your economy. We talk about your rights in the sea. We talk about your ability to fish. We talk about your ability to gather oil and gas. Those are things that affects you in that sense. That is why there must be some attention being paid to it. There must be some vital importance given to it in that sense. So I think there is this challenge of selling this importance to them, and we have to do it no matter what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Thenesh. Asyura?
Thank you very much for that. 3 different points. I'll just very briefly run through them. The first, I think, was mentioned by Sue on critical undersea infrastructure. And the question is, how do we assess capabilities, especially on monitoring and surveillance of our critical undersea infrastructure? I mean, quite frankly, I think we're very much at a very nascent stage in terms of preserving our CUIs, which is really quite ironic because I think our gas pipelines have been around for years. In most countries, really, I think that in terms of wanting to elicit an immediate response to damage to our CUIs, we're not there yet. And I think this is primarily due to a lack of coordination between our regulatory agencies and our maritime law enforcement agencies as well, primarily because there is still clarity around the mandate or where the authority lies when it comes to collecting surveillance data and when it comes to interdicting and eventually collecting that evidence and regulating activity around our CUIs. There is no significant national framework yet that has been established on preserving critical undersea infrastructure at a national level, and this is something that GMCP is looking to eventually support. You asked what indicators should we use, and quite frankly, the indicator would be, positive cases of coordination. We're not even looking into successful prosecution, but just the ability to coordinate with your literal state neighbor. I think that in itself should be a benchmark for a baseline success level. UNODC on our coordination on the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. We do very closely support the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum Technical Expert Working Group and also the Commanders Meeting. The Technical Expert Working Group was conducted in Manado in May, where the concept note was finalized after a couple of deliberations, and this was very quickly followed by the Commanders Meeting in Manila not long after. We do hope, as you said, Sue, for the ACF to be formalized as an ASEAN instrument eventually in the near future. On cybersecurity threats, we recognize that this is something that we need to train maritime law enforcement officers on, and we're looking to begin on a very foundational level, where it's just to really raise awareness on potential cybersecurity threats when you are operating your PC, for example. This is something that we have another program on cybersecurity. And also, in fact, in light of the recent cybersecurity convention that was recently released in Hanoi, this is something we're looking to very closely pursue under our UNODC mandate. Cybersecurity is something we do need to think about, though, not just in data collection, but how we're looking to fuse that data with other maritime operation centers. And I think this is very much linked to the question of trust. The question was, am I implying that there is currently a very low trust deficit, or is there a trust deficit between our maritime law enforcement agencies? And really, I think the problem is due to a very pragmatic consideration where there's a lot of uncertainty on how confidential data sharing should take place. Do we change the data format? Do we run that data through our superiors? What kind of approval process do we need? And so there is a number of bureaucratic red tape that we kind of need to work around. Inherently, I think the problem is that we don't speak to each other enough, especially across borders, on a daily or operational basis. In a lot of the forums that we conduct, MLE officers are for the very first time meeting their counterparts, across the border. And so we need to do more of this, not just in dialogue, but we need to conduct tabletop exercises, scenarios. We need to test ideas, test scenarios and potential threats that might face us. And we need to maybe adopt a very cooperative approach when we're speaking to each other, look into considering what a common language would look like, and really realize that regional security should be protected as a public good and not as a competitive pie that we need to slice up and allocate to each country. The last question is on how do I see the efficacy of MDA as a tool to gather evidence. Currently, where we stand, access to MDA tools is exclusive. And so this framework allows us to see MDA as an evidence gathering tool. However, this diminishes the value of technology and the role of MDA in terms of building that common operating picture. Ultimately, we need to move away from this mindset and look to break the walls around exclusivity and try to equalize access to MDA software. So because we haven't reached that point yet, we can now say, yes, we can use MDA as a tool for evidence gathering because some member states may have access to that and some may not. But in equalizing access to MDA, eventually we will all be able to witness a particular incident at sea. And so when we're thinking about data gathering, we're no longer looking into evidence collection, where the evidence would be presented post facto after the event, but rather through MDA as a common public good. By witnessing an incident taking place in real time, this generates regional ownership to act immediately and to respond immediately to an incident at sea. That data would be the driver behind immediate action, and it will not come after during prosecution. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Arie, please.
Yes. Kung, thank you so much for the question. Yeah, as we remember, the joint statement at that time was creating a national drama, and a lot of us tried to question or challenge or clarify the government statement. And at that time, the Indonesian Foreign Ministry already reconfirmed that we don't have any overlapping area with China, and it has been so until now. Yeah. But the concerning position that we have to wait is that we do recognize that we will have cooperation with China in terms of the exploration and exploitation of the natural resources in that area. The thing is, in what legal document that Indonesia and China will have. If the legal documents under the Indonesian foreign investment, that is fine. It means that we could have, it is still under Indonesian jurisdiction and under Indonesian law. But if the cooperation it's made as a bilateral document between states, that is automatically confirmed that Indonesia acknowledge Chinese claim in that area. So we have to wait. But until now, there's no progress in that area. So if you have any other information, please correct me. Yeah. As for the question for Mr. Secretary, Deputy Secretary, yes, Indonesia is very much pay attention to fisheries. And I guess the Arbitral Award distinguished between historic rights claimed by states and traditional fishing rights exercised by fishing communities. And as a traditional fishing rights is limited, community-based, and they do not create any sovereignty or sovereign rights. Yeah, their legal status depends on the maritime zone. So I guess for Indonesia, for example, in its EEZ, however, the pre-existing fishing practices is generally replaced by the rules by UNCLOS, so that any foreign fishermen or fishers have no automatic right to fish in another state's or Indonesia's EEZ. So other country who wish to claim traditional fishing ground to Indonesia's EEZ, Indonesia still have these sovereign rights under UNCLOS. So they have to be authorized or licensed under Indonesian law. Thank you very much.
Now, at this point, I will abuse the moderator's privilege.
So many abuse, today.
We might as well, right? And ask our panelists a short reflection in terms of what message would you like to send to ASEAN, to Philippines, and to China, or choose any of these, about the 10 years of the arbitration and enforcing it or not. Arie, since you've been suspect for the whole day anyway, I'd like to start with you. And then Asyura would follow, and then Thenesh, of course.
Okay, since we come to this room with open mind and try to seek peaceful arrangement, so I guess not only China and the Philippines, but also other countries that might have an interest in the South China Sea, please do smaller, reasonable, and practical cooperation. Start small, and we can continue from that. If we have cooperation works in the ground, then that will be a good modality for us to think for the bigger picture.
Thank you, Arie. Asyura?
Thank you. I think in a nutshell, I'd say don't be afraid of technology. Embrace it as a multiplier. It's definitely a key resource that we should all become more comfortable with, especially as we're looking to enforce international law and maintain that stable maritime order.
Thenesh, please.
You can see among the panelists here, she's a tech guru, he's the diplomat, and I'm probably the disruptor. Okay, so my hope for ASEAN has always been the younger generation's hope, which is for us to find a way to cooperate within ourselves first, and then to learn to live and to cooperate and work with China. I think it's very hard to not cooperate or work with China. It's very hard to not cooperate or work with each other. I think, Secretary, you have also mentioned that in a difficult time like this, a lot of unity and a lot of collaboration and cooperation is much needed in that sense. So my hope is, especially for the new generation is coming over to take over the roles of the diplomats and the roles of the ambassadors and all, is that there must be some form of understanding that there is a room to cooperate for some sense. Not in every sense, maybe start small like what Prof has said, but some sense we have to cooperate. And I don't think we want to live in a world where we just continue fighting and we just continue to race to the bottom when it comes to investment, when it comes to territory, when it comes to everything and other things. So there must be some form of cooperation in that sense. And I believe this message should also be sent and also be communicated, not just in this room, but also to the Gen Zs. 24%, I think, and it will be 30% soon of the whole ASEAN population will be Gen Z. And how they approach the world is very much different. And I think the challenge is not so much China, the challenge is not so much ourselves, but the challenge is within our own territory, within our own state. How do we convince these people to not only either to continue what we are fighting for, or whoever you are fighting for, but also to inherit it, in the best way possible, so that we can have a more prosperous and more peaceful and more stable world. The world is just too disruptive at this moment that we shouldn't be arguing and fighting a lot. Thank you.
On that note, as everyone knows, one of the worst things to do in Southeast Asia is to stand between you and lunch. So I will end this panel here, and please join me in thanking Asyura, Arie, and Thenesh for such an invigorating panel. And I'll turn it back to Cynthia, no, for any announcement.